In this topic, I'm going to cover the automation of common and repetitive tasks using sequence and macro. This topic is about automating HAL. Common and repetitive tasks can be automated using two sets of tools under animation, macro and sequence. I'm going to cover sequence first. Sequence records pen strokes, and I'm going to use this function to create a text reveal. Using this stencil as my guide, I can turn on record, go into painting, and the cursor turns red to indicate that the pen strokes are being recorded. Sequence records the pen strokes as I trace around the stencil. I now return to animation and turn off record. So I can now turn stencil use on and replay the sequence. The cursor is not visible because the show menu function is turned off. If I replay with the cursor on, the cursor and the menus are visible. I can use the faster button to speed the whole process up. The result can then be recorded down to tape, fetched back onto the clip desk, and keyed in over the final composite. The second, and by far more powerful set of tools for animation, is macro. Macros are similar to sequences, but also record menu box functions and parameter values, as well as pen strokes. Macros are flexible. They can be edited and viewed. A large number can be stored in memory, and up to 10 can be assigned to dedicated hotkeys on the external keyboard. I'm going to use a number of macros to automate the tasks involved in producing 6 versions of this sting. My first task is to take the rushes for this week's program and trim them to length. So now I'm going to go into macro and hit record. And I get a record flag to indicate that all subsequent commands are going to be inserted into the macro. So I go onto the clip desk, go to frame 50, snip after, and delete the tail frames to the right of the out point. Select the next clip, return to animation and turn off record. I can now list the commands in the macro, so I go onto the clip desk to clip frame 50, snip after and delete to the right and return to animation. I don't need this return to animation, so I can delete that away. So I select delete, hit the selected item, that turns yellow to show that it's marked for deletion. So I delete the selected items and hit confirm. There are 5 more clips on the clip desk, so I need to loop that macro 5 times and replay. The macro now automatically trims all of the rushes to 50 frames. But if I look more carefully at each of the rushes, in this case, for example, there's a focus problem at the beginning of the clip, and we need to find the correct in point before this guy jumps in the water. This macro would work better if I could manually select the in point before actually doing the trim. So I'm now going to use an edit to enable me to mix automated and manual functions. So I'm going to insert a pause after I go onto the clip desk. This pause will allow me to manually select that in point. Now I'm going to insert some commands after that point to delete the frames to the left before the in point. So let's pull the rushes down again. I'm now going to hit the insert key on the external keyboard. This displays an orange flag to indicate that the following commands are going to be inserted after that in point. So I need to snip before the in point and delete the frames to the left. I hit insert again. Now my list indicates that I go onto the clip desk, pause for a manual decision, snip before, and then delete before. So let's run that macro. Need to loop it 6 times. So I need to manually select the in point after that focus problem. Hit the continue key on the external keyboard. And once again, before this lady walks into frame, is my in point. Hit continue, and the rest of the task is automated. Just before this guy jumps off the boat, there's my in point, and continue. So now I've trimmed my rushes to the required length from the required in point using a combination of manual and automated functions. I'm now going to join these all together and take them into colour correction. When I get into effects, I notice that not only the colour module, but all of the other modules have got some funny values in from a previous session. I can write a utility macro to reset all of the parameter values in all of the effects modules. When I've written that macro, I'm going to assign it to a hotkey. This time I'm going to use the record key on the external keyboard to initiate the recording process. So I go into record, reset the icon to black and white, and clear the timeline. Reset the keyer, default the values in blur with the D key on the keyboard. Remember D for default, S for smallest, B for biggest. Into blur, default the values. Into colour correction, original values, and the same for transform. I now turn record off, and here's the list. And I only need the D, so I can delete away these other key presses. I now have a macro which will default all of the modules within the effects menu. Notice that if I want to scroll up and down, I press in the blank grey area and drag the cursor up and down. To open up an individual menu item, press on it, and the indented sections reveal all of the key presses. So, now that I have this macro, I can label it. I can save it to disk. and it can also be assigned to one of the 10 hotkeys. So I select hotkey number 1, hit assign, I'll just enter some strange values into all of the menus. And run that macro by hitting the M1 key. Now what's going to happen when I run this macro is that I'm going to see an error message because I made a couple of deliberate mistakes in producing this macro. The error box says that it's not found the box called black and white. This is because that can be found not in the color menu but the icon menu. So we need to explicitly get into the icon menu in order to find the black and white box. So if I insert after this point and use the insert key to go into effects, into icon, when I run the macro, it will run correctly. I'll now press the M1 hotkey to run the macro, and we'll see another error. This error indicates that the box that was pressed was found in an unexpected state. As well as pressing boxes, macro is sensitive to the condition the box is in at the time that it's pressed. In this case, the box needs to be turned off as opposed to on. We've got 5 options here: turn the box on or turn it off. Turn it on if off or off if on. On if off will always turn the box on. Off if on will always turn the box off. Always will hit the box regardless of the state that it's in, and will have the effect of toggling it on and then off on the next loop. So now that I've corrected that mistake, I can hit the M1 key again, and the macro runs without an error. So with a single pen stroke, I've reset all of the values in all of the modules under the effects menu. So now I can proceed with my colour correction. So this colour correction is going to make the clips all the same tone of yellow. I'm then going to use a macro to chop the composite clip back up into 50 frame segments, and using another macro I'm going to create 6 different coloured versions of each clip. So here's the colour corrected version of all of my clips. But I want each section to be a different hue, and I can automate that process with a macro. But first of all, I need to trim the clips down to 50 frame segments again. I can use an edited version of the macro I used before. This simply goes to frame 50 and snips after. I can just set an insert there to move on to the next segment of the clip. So I'll loop that 5 times and replay. So now my clips trim back to 50 frame segments. I'm now going to write a macro to incrementally hue rotate each of these clips. So I'll use record on the keyboard, into effects, into colour, clear the timeline, increment the hue by 60, confirm that, and process. back to the clip desk, delete the old version and move on to the next clip. I can now turn record off, check the list, I go into effects, into colour, clear the timeline, set the hue to 60, increment that value, process, back to the clip desk, delete the old version and move on to the next clip. So there are 5 clips left, so I need to loop that a further 5 times, so I'll hit replay. So each time the macro moves on to another clip, it increases the hue rotation by 60 degrees. So now I've got 6 different shaded versions of those clips, and I'm ready to drop them into the final composite. So now I need to go into Paste Up to set that up. When I go into Paste Up, I find that there are some items hanging around from the previous session. I've got a global offset, local offsets, light effects, edge effects. It would be quite time consuming to reset all of these parameters. I'd need to go original global, original all, original light effects, original edge effects. But I program these functions into a macro. This macro has been assigned to hotkey number 2. So this provides a handy utility for clearing the paste up menu. I just hit M2. And all the values are reset. So now when I cut, I only cut what's required. All the other items are deleted. So now I've cleared the paste up menu, I can go onto the clip desk, cut out the elements I require for my composite, prioritise them, find the keyframes, and now I'm ready to begin compositing. What I need to do is select layer 1, put only one on, and automate the process involved in making the composite. So once again I go into record, into paste up, cut out the clip, rewind and do it. Back to the clip desk, take a copy of the new version, title it, save it, delete it, delete the old foreground, and now I'm ready to begin the process again. So I turn on the loop, and this time using the Do button on the external keyboard, start the macro again. So, each time a composite is completed, clip desk pulls the stencil down onto the next foreground and moves on to the next composite. And now the macro is finished, as indicated by the yellow box here. So now I can go into the library find my clips, and here are the 6 versions that I've automatically produced using macro. In this topic, we're going to be covering filters and the transform menu. First, I'll deal with filters. Filters can be found in the effects menu. Within the filter menu, a scrolling buffer shows the filters that are loaded. To load a filter, go into the library and find types. When a filter is selected, it is then added to the list in the buffer. I'm going to preview a filter on this clip. To preview a filter, select it and then press down with the pen. And a preview window will show the effect. The image by moving and changing the luminance of individual neighbours. We can examine this by looking at here we can see the pattern created by the filter. The pixel in the centre is offset and its luminance and transparency are changed by the filter. We can examine this filter in more detail into the custom menu, which displays the matrix. To create a new filter, hit clear. 3 types of matrices are available: 3x3 or 7x7. I'm going to create a simple filter using 3x3 matrix. The symmetry H and symmetry V refer to and vertical symmetry, so that if I leave both of those active and place a number in one of the boxes, it's mirrored in both the horizontal and the vertical axes. If I remove symmetry, I can place different numbers in each of the corners. Now I'm going to preview. Zoom. Preview window into place. And we can see that the filter has caused the pixel in the centre to be offset up and left, up and right, down and left, down and right by 1 pixel, and it's reduced its transparency to 25%. The system has calculated the normal for the pixel in the centre, and so the matrix shows us that each copy of that pixel is 1/4 of the normal value, resulting in a 25% transparent stamp. Now let's take a look at some of the preset filters that are shipped with the system or provided on the starter pack upgrade MO. Next, we're going to take a look. Transform works by dividing the video image into a pattern of paintbrush strokes or stamps. Whatever brush is selected from the palette, whether it's paint, chalk or airbrush, is applied in Transform. There's a fourth brush category enabled with the new Paintbox software called Custom. Two types of custom brush can be created within the Paintbox menu by going Custom, Edit, New. The first type is the profile brush, which enables the graph base adjustment of the airbrush profile. The second type of brush is the cutout brush. This is a stencil, and whatever is in the stencil can be cut out to define the shape of the custom brush. This too can be applied in Transform. There are 6 parameters which control the brush pattern itself. The first of these parameters is pitch. Pitch can be adjusted by highlighting the numeric value and scrolling with the pen, or entering a precise numeric value. Pitch controls the amount of space between each brush stamp and can be adjusted uniformly or in the X and Y axes independently using the X and Y controls. The second parameter is size. This controls the size of the brush stamp. The toolbar straddling both the pitch and size values enables pitch and size to be adjusted together in proportion. Dither randomizes the position of the brush stamps. Offset controls the overall position of the brush pattern. By pressing on the direction arrow, we can select a new direction. The angle of travel can be fine-tuned by adjusting the X and Y aspect controls. Currently the pattern is travelling at 45 degrees. To change that angle, if I make Y 50% of X, the angle of travel is now 22.5 degrees. Density controls the opacity of the brush stamps. The sixth parameter is to the left and is called explode. Activating explode temporarily hides some of the other parameters. Explode separates the brush pattern. By applying an explode algorithm. A negative value will cause the image to implode. The X and Y sliders enable the origin of the explosion to be adjusted. Turning off the explode parameter reveals the hidden parameters. On the left are some utilities. Do all and do pen work in the same way as all of the other effects menus. Hex rearranges the brush pattern so that it's hexagonal. Where brushes overlap, the sort function lays the brush stamps down in order of their luminance, the lightest being laid down last. Where there is a variation in size, the brushes are sorted in order of their size, the smallest brushes being placed down last. Background colour for the transform can be defined by placing a colour into the background. Pick processes the transform using the clip as its own background. Update automatically refreshes the screen display when you move along the timeline. I'm now going to set the pitch and size to 1. To cancel the redraw, press with the pen. Where pitch and size are set to 1, the resulting transform is identical to the original image. As I move through the clip, the screen is refreshed. To cancel screen refresh, hit update. You can then move through the clip and adjust parameter values without the screen refreshing. To preview a frame, hit do. This manually refreshes the screen. Turning on update again means that the screen will automatically refresh. Original resets the transform to the values shown. A static transform with a custom brush, for example, can be used to add a texture to the clip. I'm going to use a custom brush selected from my custom brush buffer within the paint box menu and apply that to this colour map clip. I'll use the toolbar to increase the pitch and size, then adjust the pitch, select hexagonal packing, fine-tune the pitch and size, and process. The colour in the exact centre of each brush stamp is replicated throughout the spread of the brush. I'm now going to select a brush with a gradient in its transparency. I'm going to apply it to this clip. We can see the illusion of shading, making the brushes appear more three-dimensional. This is a result of the gradient in the brush's transparency, allowing some of the black background colour to show through. Here's the finished result. A number of preset textures are supplied with every system. In the case of an upgrade, these are supplied on the starter pack MO disc. To locate the preset textures, search in the library for graphs and pictures under the name TFX Static. Use the title sort to reorder them alphanumerically. The picture with the same name as the graph is a preview and an explanation of the effect. So this effect will be achieved by loading this brush and this graph. First, I'll load the graph. Now I'll go into painting and load the brush. An example reel called TFX Reel is also supplied on the upgrade pack. This contains a number of clips and clip stencils with which to try out some of the transform effects. So I'm going to load this clip, take that into the transform menu, and we can see that the preset has arranged the hexagonal brushes in a hexagonal packing, resulting in a honeycomb effect. Here's the finished result. All of the parameter values within transform can be adjusted by randomized and modulate. First, I'll look at randomize in the context of size. To add randomness to a parameter value, press on the rand box. Then press in the random numeric box to enter the required amount of randomness. This setting results in a pattern where the brushes vary randomly between 75% more and 75% less than 5. This is the result of that setting. Notice how the randomness is not fixed throughout the clip, and the randomness changes on every frame, resulting in the boiling, bubbling effect. This is because the randomness is effectively unlocked. It is possible to apply a lock to the randomness. We can lock by frame or by line. First, I'll use frame. Notice as I go through the clip, although the brush colours, as determined by the clip underneath them, are changing, the random pattern remains fixed. If I turn off the lock, the randomness changes on every frame. If I select line, a single random pattern is applied on the top line and repeated on all lines below it. This means that there will only be one random for every line and every frame. To switch between line and frame, turn off the current lock and then move to the next lock. The F and L buttons are on-off switches, not toggle switches. So once again, let's take a look at that unlocked randomization. Here's the frame lock randomization. And this randomization is locked on the line. Now let's look at the modulation. In this example, I'm going to modulate the offset. I do this by highlighting the offset numeric value and selecting Mod. Modulation works in the similar way to randomization by raising and lowering the parameter values over time. But it does so in the form of a sine wave, so the parameter value rises and falls uniformly. By increasing the amount of modulation, the wave becomes higher. The period box refers to the width or the length of the wave. So by increasing this, it means that the modulation takes 200 stamps of the brush to complete one phase of modulation. In this instance, the modulation completes its phase in a period of 50 brush stamps. Where modulation is unlocked, the lines are animated. This is because the modulation continues its phase on every frame. When the modulation is locked on frame, this means that the modulation wave remains constant throughout the clip. When the modulation is locked on the line, a single modulation pattern is applied to the top line and then repeated throughout the frame and throughout the clip. So let's just review that. This is an unlock modulation where the wave is moving. This is frame locked, so we have a basket effect produced by the wave, but it doesn't move. This clip has its modulation locked on the line, resulting in a flag ripple texture. Transform parameter values can also be keyframed, using the same keyframe and graph functionality as the other effects menus. I'm going to use transform keyframes to create a transition between this clip and this clip. First, I must set this clip as the background. I'll make this my current clip and take that into transform. I'll now clear down the timeline and set the required pitch and size for the initial keyframe. I'll now turn on the background box so that the transform is processed over the background clip. Now I'm going to drag through to the end of my timeline and change the pitch. I now have an orange box next to the pitch parameter value. This indicates that the parameter is changing over time. By tapping on the orange box, I can open up the profile graph describing the change in parameter value over time. And by dragging along with the white bar, I can see parameter value flagged up on the graph and frame number shown here in the frame box. I'm going to make the graph a linear profile. I'm now going to add some dither to make this effect look a little bit more naturalistic. By pressing in the dither parameter value box and scrolling, I can increase the amount of dither, or the randomness of the position of the brush stamps. Notice how the brushes move randomly to different positions where the dither is unlocked. If I apply a frame lock to the dither, when I separate the brushes, each brush follows a linear path as the dither increases. Let's look at that again. Unlocked, and frame locked. This will result in a smoother separation. To make the brushes disappear at the end of the transition, I'm going to go and edit the density graph to put a fade in. Here's frame 35. By tapping on the graph line, I've now inserted a dummy keyframe at that point. By taking hold of the graph line at frame 40 and pulling down, I can create the fade. And by dragging along the line in the graph menu, I can preview the effect. Let's take a look at the result. A number of preset animated effects can be found in the library. If you search under Graph and Picture under the name TFX Animated and sort by title, a list of animated transform graphs can be found. I'm going to load this effect. This uses the explode function to create a burst in the centre of the picture. This is a preview of the effect, and this is an explanation. Now I'm going to load the graph. And I apply the effect to this clip. And I want the explosion to begin at the point where the player makes contact with the ball. So if I snip after this point and take this section of the clip into transform, we can preview the preset effect. But the X and Y coordinates are not correct for the type of clip we're working with. So let's wind back to the appropriate frame and now adjust the X and Y coordinates. So they match the point of contact with the ball. So now the explosion begins in the right place. And here's the result. I'm now going to save the edited version of the effect under a new name. This is achieved by hitting the Save box in the Transform menu. To reload the effect, I need to search for the graph. The stencil can be used in Transform in the normal way. So I'm going to take this clip and use this stencil to mask the effect by going Stencil use. So as I drag through the timeline, this means that the transform is applied only in the area which is not protected by the stencil. However, in transform, the stencil has a unique function in that it can control the amount of parameter value. This is achieved by highlighting the selected parameter in pink. I'm going to work with offset on this occasion. So first of all, I'll set the pitch and size. Notice under offset there is only one value, 0.0. When I press the offset parameter name, the parameter name turns pink, and there are then two sets of values separated by 3 dots. This means that the left-hand value applies under a solid stencil and the right-hand value applies under a minus stencil. Now I'm going to change the right-hand value. Now the brush stamps directly under the hole in the stencil have been offset 9 pixels to the southeast. This is because the offset parameter is under the control of the stencil. This is indicated by the pink label on the offset parameter box. So as I increase or decrease the parameter value, that change is applied only under the hole in the stencil. Notice this aliasing or contouring here. This is caused by the brush stamps having to travel too great a distance and leaving a gap behind, showing the background colour through it. If I work with a more blurred version of the same stencil, the slope in the effect is reduced. And there is no contouring. If I now process that effect and take the result into the colour menu and use the same stencil for colour correction, we can also add the illusion of lighting to the effect. Let's take a look at that same concept, but with clips. So I'm going to take this clip and apply this stencil of a water ripple to it. I'll now set my pitch and size close to normal values. Turn on stencil control for offset. Set my offset direction. And ramp up the maximum value for the offset. Another way to reduce the contouring is to increase the size of the paintbrush so that it closes up the gaps, or to process on top of the original picture. Here's the result. Any number of parameter values can be controlled by the stencil. In this next example, I'm going to take a logo and apply a travelling mat to it. I'll set my pitch and size. I'm now going to put the offset under the control of the stencil. I'm going to change the offset direction and set the maximum value to 750. This now means that when any part of the image is under a miner's stencil, then the brushes that make up that part of the image must travel 750 pixels to the northwest. To make this seem a little bit more realistic, I'm also going to put some dither under the control of the stencil. This value means that any part of the picture that is under a miner's stencil will be dithered by 150 pixels. So let's preview that. Notice how some of the black information from the lower left-hand side of the picture has been offset and dithered up to this position, covering up the logo. We can use the sort by luminance function to eliminate that. Now the brightest brush stamps are laid down over the top of the darkest brush stamps. Here's the resulting effect. A number of stencil control effects are also available on the starter pack disc. Search in the library for graph and picture under the name TFX Sten Control. In the same way as before, a number of pictures describing the effect can be loaded. I'm now going to load the graph. So here are the instructions for working with the example reel. Copy clip 1 and apply it as its own stencil. So here's the example reel. Here's clip 1. I'll now copy that and apply it as a stencil and take it into transform. Notice here that the size value is now under control of the stencil. The values are set so that any part of the picture which is sitting under a solid stencil, the brush size will be 0, as is the case here. Any part of the picture sitting under a minor stencil will be comprised of brushes which are size 5, such as here, resulting in a kind of colour halftone effect. I'm going to apply that to this clip here. I'm just going to copy that and make that into a stencil and take it into transform. If I go back to painting and load my custom brush, this brush has some shading in its transparency, so the result will appear to be more three-dimensional. Now I can increase the pitch and size using the toolbar, reduce the pitch, and also contour the effect by adding some stencil controlled offset So now any part of the picture which is under a minor stencil will be offset 15 pixels to the northwest. So there are a number of things happening here. The gradient in the brush's transparency makes the balls appear three-dimensional. The stencil control over size gives the halftone effect, and the stencil control over offset gives the impression that the brushes are lifted up in Z space. And here's the result. Once again, I can save the effect directly from the transform menu. This is now stored as a graph file. In this example, I'm going to load a custom brush to add an animated texture to this clip. I'm going to process it on top of the original picture, and I'm going to keyframe the pitch and size so these star shapes increase in size. Here's a preview of the effect. In order to rotate the brushes, I can overlay a macro on top of the transform effect. Although there isn't a control for angle in the transform menu, there is a control for angle in the painting menu. Also, the randomness of size cannot be keyframed directly from the transform menu. I'm going to add some instructions in the macro to increment this value. Macros are covered in more detail in another topic. I'm going to rewind the clip to the beginning, go into the animation menu, select record. The record flag appears to indicate that all subsequent operations will be recorded into the macro. I go into painting, select brush angle, increment the brush angle, go into transform, open up the size box, increment the randomness, select do all to process a single frame, and press button 1 on the grip to sell the result to a new clip. I can now use the record button on the keyboard to turn off the recording process. Here's a list of the functions that are included in the macro. I go into painting, vary the angle, into effects, vary the randomness, process the result, and then use rat switch 1 to sell the result to a new clip. If I turn the loop on to the required number of frames, I can now replay, and the randomness and brush angle are automatically increased on top of the transform keyframes. Let's take a look at the result.